Have you ever stood in a hospital lobby with a discharge paper in your hand, a plastic bag of your own belongings at your feet, and realized that not a single person in the world was coming to get you? I have. 71 days. That's how long I was in that cardiac rehabilitation center in Tucson. Not a vacation, not a retreat. 71 days of blood pressure monitors, of learning how to walk up a flight of stairs without my chest seizing, of eating unsalted food that tasted like cardboard and being grateful for it, because at least I was still alive to complain. 71 days of waking up in a bed that wasn't mine, in a room that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, and telling myself that when I got out, things were going to be different. My wife had passed 14 months before that, 43 years together. Lorraine was the kind of woman who remembered every birthday, every anniversary, who kept a little notebook in her purse with the names of our grandchildren's teachers, their favorite foods, the exact size of every shoe in the family. When she died, I didn't just lose my wife. I lost the person who kept me organized, kept me anchored, kept me from drifting into myself too far. The drifting is what got me. I started drinking about 4 months after the funeral. Nothing dramatic at first. A glass of bourbon in the evening. Then 2. Then I stopped counting. My son called it a phase. My daughter-in-law stopped calling altogether. My doctor called it dangerous, especially with my heart condition, especially with the medications I was already on. I called it the only thing that made the silence bearable. Last November, I collapsed in the kitchen. Woke up in the ER with wires on my chest and a nurse asking me if I knew what year it was. The cardiologist was blunt in the way only very good doctors allow themselves to be. He told me if I didn't stop drinking, I wouldn't survive to see another Thanksgiving. He wasn't being dramatic. He was just telling me the truth. So I agreed to go. 71 days at a facility in Tucson that specialized in cardiac patients with substance issues. My son drove me there. He hugged me at the door, told me he'd be there when I got out. I believed him. I had no reason not to. The night before discharge, I called him. He didn't answer. I left a voicemail. Said I'd be ready to be picked up at 10 in the morning, that I was feeling good, that I couldn't wait to get home and sleep in my own bed. I told him I loved him. He never called back. I waited until 10:30, sitting in a chair by the front entrance with that plastic bag and my discharge folder. I watched 2 other patients get picked up, a woman whose husband brought flowers, an older man whose daughter practically ran across the parking lot to reach him. I watched all of that and kept looking down at my phone. Nothing. I called again at 10:45. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called my daughter-in-law's number. Same thing. I sat there for another 20 minutes, thinking maybe there was traffic, maybe something came up, maybe I was being unreasonable. The receptionist at the front desk, a young woman named Bev, who had been kind to me the entire stay, walked over around 11 and asked if everything was okay. I told her my ride was running late. She nodded in that careful way people do when they suspect the truth is worse than what you're saying. I had $68 in my wallet. That was everything I'd had on me when I was admitted back in November, and it had just sat in the facility safe for 71 days. $68 and a cell phone, with a cracked screen and no one on the other end of it. I stepped outside because I didn't want to sit in that lobby anymore. The Arizona sun in January is something people from the Midwest never quite get used to. Warm enough that you don't need a coat, but with a sharpness to the light that reminds you it's still winter somewhere else in the world. I stood on the curb and thought about what I was going to do. A cab to the airport would wipe out most of what I had. A flight back to Columbus would cost money I didn't have access to out here. My bank account was in order, but I hadn't thought to bring a card because I'd assumed I wouldn't need one. I hadn't planned for this because it hadn't occurred to me that I'd need to plan for this. That's when I heard a voice behind me. "You look like a man who just got some bad news." I turned around. There was a man leaning against a pickup truck parked in the short-term lot. Late 40s, maybe early 50s. Tan jacket, work boots, a paper cup of coffee in his hand. He wasn't looking at me like I was something to be pitied. He was looking at me like he recognized something. "Something like that," I said. He nodded. Took a sip from his cup. "You a patient here?" "Was. Just discharged this morning." He looked at the bag in my hand and then back at my face. "Somebody supposed to pick you up?" I didn't answer right away. There's a particular kind of pride that men my age carry around like a second skeleton, and admitting that your own son hadn't shown up to take you home from a cardiac rehab facility felt like it would crack something that couldn't be put back together. "Plans fell through," I said. He pushed off the truck and walked toward me, hand extended. "I'm Theo," he said. "Wait," I said. "Walt Holloway." I caught it a second after. Walt was in the file. I paused. "Sorry. Old habit. Name's Ed Marsh." He shook my hand anyway, either not noticing or not caring. "Ed, where are you trying to get to?" "Columbus, Ohio." He let out a low breath. "That's a haul, I know." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You want to sit down? I've got nowhere to be for another 40 minutes. I don't know why I said yes. Maybe because my knees were starting to ache from standing. Maybe because there was something steadying about this man. Something that felt safe in the way that very few strangers ever feel. I sat on the tailgate of his truck, and he leaned against the side of it, and we just stayed like that for a minute. Then he asked me, "How long were you in there?" 71 days. He whistled low, cardiac, heart, and the drinking that made it worse. He nodded, no judgment in it. "My dad was a drinker," he said. "Not a bad man, just couldn't get out from under it." "I wasn't a bad man either," I said. And then, because it had been 71 days since I'd said it out loud to anyone outside of a group session, I said I lost my wife. And then I lost myself for a while. He looked at me for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he said. And he meant it. "You can always tell." We sat there in the January sun for a few more minutes, and then he said something I wasn't expecting. "Do you know a family named Carver? Out of Columbus? Glenwood area?" I looked at him. "That's my neighborhood." Something shifted in his face. "What's your address?" I told him. "The house on Birchfield Lane that Lorraine and I had bought in 1991 when the neighborhood was still mostly empty lots and young families with bikes in the driveways." He stared at me for so long I started to wonder if I'd said something wrong. "You're the man with the green shutters," he said. I didn't understand what he meant. I said, "We painted them green when our daughter was born. Lorraine thought it would make the house look cheerful." He set his coffee cup down on the truck bed, and for a second I thought he was going to say something and couldn't find the words for it. Then he said, "I grew up on Birchfield, 2 houses down from you. My mom and I lived there until I was about 11. We had the brown ranch with the busted mailbox." I stared at him. I tried to place it. 30 years ago, the brown ranch. A woman, thin, always carrying grocery bags from the bus stop. A boy with a bike. "Sandra," I said. "Your mother's name was Sandra." His jaw tightened. "You remembered her. Your mother used to wave at Lorraine from across the yard. She had red hair. And you," I stopped. I was remembering something specific now. "You used to ride your bike past our house every afternoon. You couldn't have been more than 9 or 10. "I was 10, he said, "when it happened." He didn't say what it was right away, but I already half knew. Sandra had disappeared from the neighborhood suddenly. 1 week she was there, the next the house was empty. I remembered Lorraine asking around and being told that Sandra had gone through something and moved in with family. "Your mother got sick," I said. "She had a breakdown," he said. "After my father left, we lost the house. For about 3 weeks we had nowhere to go." He paused. "And then your wife knocked on our door with a casserole dish and a phone number for a social worker she knew." I went very still. "She did?" "She did." "And you came over the next day with the name of a family shelter that had space, and you put $50 in my mom's hand and told her it wasn't charity. It was just neighbors looking out for each other." He looked down at his boots. "I was 10 years old and I didn't understand any of it at the time. But my mom talked about you and your wife for the rest of her life. She said you were the only people on that street who treated her like a human being when everything fell apart." I couldn't speak for a moment. I remembered it now. I remembered Lorraine coming home from that visit with red eyes and saying we had to do something. I remembered going over there. I remembered the boy, standing in the hallway in 2 big sneakers looking at us like he was trying to decide whether adults could be trusted. I had forgotten all of it. Not because it wasn't important. Because to us, it was just what you did. You helped people who needed help. That was what Lorraine believed more than anything. "How is your mother?" I asked. "She passed 8 years ago," he said. "But she was happy. She got herself together. Went back to school when I was in high school. Became a dental hygienist, remarried a decent man. She made a good life." He looked at me, "And she never forgot what you did." I didn't know what to say. I just sat on that tailgate in the parking lot of that rehab facility in Tucson and felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Like the world still made a kind of sense. "I run a contracting company now," he said. "Commercial construction. I've got a crew here finishing a project. That's why I'm in Tucson." He paused. "And I'm going to drive you to the airport and put you on a plane home. And I don't want to hear anything about it. That's not." He said my name in a way that closed the argument. Let me do this. I let him. On the way to the airport, he asked me what I was going home to, and I told him. Not all of it, not at first. But by the time we got to Sky Harbor, I had told him enough. About Lorraine, about the drinking, about the 71 days, and about my son, and about the phone call I'd made the night before that had gone unanswered. He listened without interrupting. That's a rare thing in a person. When he pulled up to the departure's curb, he turned to me and said, "You said your son didn't answer." "No, has he been?" He chose his words carefully. "Has this been building for a while? Since your wife passed?" I thought about it honestly, and I said yes, it had been building. The calls getting shorter, the visits getting less frequent, the excuses. My daughter-in-law's voice on the phone going flatter every time. My son deferring every decision, every question to her. By the time I'd gone into the facility, I could feel something wrong in the space between us, but I'd told myself it was grief, told myself it was the drinking, told myself things would be better once I got better. "Is she managing anything for you?" he asked. "Financially, while you were away." Something cold moved through me. "She has access to my accounts. We set it up so she could pay the bills while I was away. She offered. She handled everything." He looked at me very carefully. "Okay," he said, "when you get home, the first thing you do is go to your bank in person. Not the app, not the phone. In person. And you look at every transaction from the past 71 days. Why are you saying that?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because I've seen it before, and I hope I'm wrong." He wasn't wrong. I got home to Columbus on a flight he'd paid for. The house was cold because the heat had been turned down low, the way you do it when you're trying to save money on an empty house, not the way you do it when someone is paying the bills for a person who lives there. Lorraine's plants on the kitchen windowsill were dead. She'd had those plants for 20 years. My daughter-in-law had been in that house. I knew she had. I'd asked her to check on it twice during my stay, and she'd let Lorraine's plants die. That was the first thing. The second thing was my neighbor across the street, a retired postal worker named June, who came over before I'd even gotten my coat off. June was 73 and had lived across from us for over 2 decades, and she had a voice like a school bell and absolutely no patience for what she called tomfoolery. She told me my daughter-in-law had been at the house 3 times while I was away. She told me she'd watched her carry boxes out to her car. She told me she'd watched her let a man into the house once. Not my son, another man she didn't recognize, older, carrying what looked like an appraisal clipboard, and that he'd been inside for about 40 minutes. I sat down at my kitchen table and I called my bank the next morning when they opened at 9. $14,230. That's how much had moved out of my account in 71 days. Not bills, not utilities, not the mortgage. Transfers, withdrawals, and 3 separate payments to a company I didn't recognize. I sat in the branch manager's office and looked at the printout, and something in my chest went very quiet and very hard. I called my son from the parking lot. He answered this time. I didn't raise my voice. That surprised me more than it probably surprised him. I told him I was home. I told him what I'd found, and I waited. There was a long silence, and then he said, "Dad, she was just managing expenses. You were gone for over 2 months. There were costs. $14,000 in costs." Another silence. Longer this time. "I'll talk to her about it," he said. "You'll talk to her about it," I repeated. "Dad, she's been stressed. She's been managing a lot. She had one job," I said. "Pay the utilities and leave my house alone." He didn't say anything. I said, "I stood outside that facility for an hour yesterday morning waiting for you." Still nothing. "I called you the night before. I left you a message." "I know," he said, finally, quietly. "I know, Dad. I'm sorry. What happened?" He took a breath. "She said it wasn't a good time, that we had plans." I should have told her no. I should have come. There it was. My son, who I had raised to look a man in the eye when he spoke to him. Who I had raised on Birchfield Lane, in a green-shuttered house, with a mother who left casseroles on the doorsteps of people in trouble. My son had let his wife convince him not to pick his father up from a cardiac rehab facility, because they had plans. I said, "I need you to hear me clearly. I love you. I am your father, and I will always be your father. But I am not going to let what happened to my account sit, and I am not going to pretend yesterday didn't happen. I need you to decide where you stand." He didn't answer. I hung up. I called the man who had put me on a plane 2 days before. I told him what I'd found. He was quiet for a moment, then he gave me a name. A woman he knew in Columbus, a financial attorney named Verna Cross, who he said was the best he'd ever seen, and who he'd worked with on a property dispute 2 years ago. He said to call her and tell her he sent me. I called her that afternoon. She was direct, professional, and unimpressed with the situation in the way that very good attorneys learn to be. She told me that what I was describing, access granted under implied caretaking authority, funds moved without documented expenses to match, was potentially actionable. She told me we needed to document everything before anyone knew I was looking. She told me not to change anything in the account yet, not to confront my daughter-in-law directly, not to let on. I followed every instruction. Over the next 3 weeks, Verna built a picture. Subpoenas went out for the company that had received the 3 payments. That company, it turned out, was registered in my daughter-in-law's maiden name and had no employees, no products, no services. Just a business account into which my money had been deposited. The appraiser who'd come to my house had been hired by her, not by me. He'd valued Lorraine's jewelry and her antique secretary desk that had been in her family since the 1940s, both of which had subsequently disappeared from the house. Lorraine's desk. Lorraine's grandmother's desk that she had cried over when her mother left it to her. That was the moment I stopped being sad and became very, very clear. My son found out what was happening not from me but from his wife when Verna's office sent a letter of inquiry. He called me in a panic. He said he hadn't known. He said he swore to God he hadn't known. I believed him about the company, about the appraisal, about the specific transactions. My son was many things that disappointed me, but I didn't believe he was that. I believed his wife had run the whole thing under his nose, while he looked the other way at everything that made him uncomfortable. That's its own kind of failure. But it's a different kind. He came to the house 2 days after that call, alone. He sat at the kitchen table, where I had done every tax return since 1987, where Lorraine had made pie dough every Thanksgiving, where our grandchildren had colored Easter eggs the spring before she got sick. He sat there, and he looked like a man who had finally understood something and wasn't sure he deserved to. I failed you, he said. I let the words sit for a moment. I didn't rush to smooth them over or tell him it was all right, because it wasn't all right yet and we were too old, both of us, to pretend otherwise. Yes, I said. You did. He didn't flinch from it. I'll give him that. I kept telling myself she was handling things, that she knew better than me about the finances, about the logistics. I kept letting her be the one who talked to you because she said she had it under control. He stopped, and I didn't want to fight with her about it. I took the easy way, over and over again. Do you know what I thought about? I said, standing in that parking lot. He shook his head. I thought about the morning your mother came home from Sandra's house down the street. You were too young to remember Sandra. She was a woman who needed help, and your mother went over there and helped her. I went over the next day. We didn't talk about it much after that. We didn't congratulate ourselves. It was just what we did. I looked at him. Your mother would have been at that facility at 10 o'clock sharp. She would have been there at 9:50 just to be safe. And she would have brought food. He pressed his lips together. I'm not telling you that to make you feel worse, I said. I'm telling you because I need you to know what kind of people raised you, and what kind of person I know you can still be. We sat in silence for a while. Then he said, What happens now? With the legal stuff, Verna is handling it. We're filing a civil suit for recovery of the funds. The DA's office has also been notified. It may go further than civil. He absorbed that. She's my wife. I don't know what that means. For us, for me, I know that too. Dad, you don't have to figure it all out tonight, I said. But you do have to choose, not between her and me. Between who you are and who you've been letting yourself become. That's your decision and I can't make it for you. He left around 9. I sat in the quiet kitchen for a while. I thought about Lorraine. I thought about 71 days and $68 and a man in a tan jacket who had remembered a casserole and a $50 bill from 30 years ago. The thing about kindness is that it doesn't announce itself. You don't do it for the return. You do it because somebody needs it and you happen to be there. Lorraine believed that down to her bones, and she spent 43 years teaching it to everyone around her. She would have said that what happened to me was terrible, and then she would have found the thing inside it worth holding on to. She would have said, Look at what that boy became. Look at what your $50 and my phone number and a casserole turned into. Look at the man who stood in a parking lot and recognized a neighbor from 30 years ago and put him on a plane home. She would have cried about the desk. I won't pretend she wouldn't have. But she also would have sat across from our son and told him the truth and given him the chance to be better. That's the difference between punishment and accountability. You don't throw people away. You hold them to a higher thing. My daughter-in-law's attorney called Verna 4 days later, with an offer to return the funds and settle out of court. Verna told me about it on the phone, very calm, very professional. She said it was my decision. I thought about it for exactly 1 day. I called Verna back and told her we would take the settlement for the recovered funds, and we would also require a formal signed accounting of every transaction during my absence, with an accompanying explanation for each one. If everything was documented and returned, we would not pursue criminal charges. Not because I forgave her. Forgiveness is a long road, and I hadn't started it yet. But because my son was still my son, and destroying his life to punish his wife would not bring back Lorraine's desk, or the 71 days I spent getting well while the people I trusted let me down. It would just create more wreckage, and I was too old and too tired for more wreckage. Desk was not returned. She claimed she didn't know where it was, which I did not believe. That particular loss I will carry, but $14,000 came back, and my accounts now have my name and only my name on them. And June across the street keeps an eye on things when I'm not home, the way good neighbors do. My son calls on Sundays now. He's in counseling. He moved out of the house he shared with her 2 weeks after our kitchen conversation. I don't know what becomes of their marriage. That's not mine to know. What I know is this. 71 days of learning how to live again. $68 in my wallet and nobody coming. A man in a tan jacket who remembered something from 30 years ago and would not leave me stranded. The people who believed that taking from a grieving sick old man was a safe bet. They were counting on me to stay broken. They were counting on the drinking and the loss and the 71 days to make me into someone who couldn't fight back. They were wrong about what those 71 days made me. I walked out of that place stronger than I walked in. Not because I was healed exactly. Not because I had everything figured out. Or because my heart was suddenly fixed. Or because my son had suddenly become the man I always hoped he'd be. But because I remembered what Lorraine spent 43 years showing me. That kindness doesn't disappear. It circulates. You send it out into the world and you let it go, and you don't keep a ledger on it. And sometimes, 30 years later, it finds its way back to you in a parking lot in Arizona when you have $68 and nowhere to go. That man in the tan jacket didn't know he was returning a favor. He thought he was just helping a stranger. So had we